Greg's you're my first in studio podcast guest, and so see, look at that, I can switch the camera there. So anyway, this is Greg Anderson. He is, the last time I interacted with Greg, he was choking me to death. So Greg is a friend of mine. He is our Jiu Jitsu black belt instructor at Electric North Jiu Jitsu in Lake Stevens. He is a former Special Forces Army guy, and then also a previous Seattle police officer who made quite a sort of scene by saying, I'm not going to enforce some of these mandates, which I think are unconstitutional. But anyway, Greg, welcome. You are the first guest to the podcast, man.
Dude, thanks for having me. This is an awesome setup.
Yeah. Well, tell us. So let me ask you a question. So you, what you went in the military when you were like 18 or something like that. So what prompted you to jump in and do that?
Man, I tell everybody, whenever you hear people's stories of military service, they usually start with, I read a book when I was 8 and I knew I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Dude, none of that shit applied for me. I graduated high school. Well, I was graduating. It was coming up. It was 1999, so it was peacetime military, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do with life. I knew I hated school, so I didn't want to continue to college and waste a bunch of money and get a degree in something that I'm just going to get student debt from. And so I was like, you know what? Let's go into the military just to see what's up with it. And started talking to recruiters. And I don't know really how or why I came to this conclusion, but I was like, if I'm going into the military, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL or an Army Ranger. And I didn't know anything about those organizations other than, you know, the stuff that you see on TV or whatever. And it's funny how you will base career decisions off of the interaction with one man. The Navy recruiter was just kind of a douche, and the Army recruiter was pretty cool. So I was like, oh, Army guys are way cooler. And so, yeah, I ended up going into the Army in 1999 and went into the RIP program, which is the Ranger Indoc, and got into the 75th Ranger Regiment. And to correct anybody that's listening, like, or you said Special Forces, Army guys will be like, that's not Special Forces.
Right, okay, sorry.
That's Special Operations.
Special
the 75th Ranger Regiment falls under, it's the most high-speed light infantry unit in the world, right? But what I always tell people, I think the Ranger Regiment is one of the best stepping stones. If you want to do a career in the military, right out of high school, you can join the 75th Ranger Regiment. And what that's going to do, it's going to put you in a unit that has better funding, better equipment. You have to volunteer to be there, and if you don't meet the standard, you get kicked out at any time. And I served with good Rangers who were in my platoon for years, and they fail a PT test, and now you're out of here. And so that's one reason why I think that the Ranger Regiment is a good spot to start your military career. And then a lot of guys just branch out and go into aviation or go into Delta or whatever it may be. But it was a really good experience. The Ranger Regiment is really rooted in like discipline and military courtesy. So you're standing at parade rest for your NCOs, and you're standing at attention for your officers. All that stuff that, from the outside looking in seems kind of silly. And I think it is now that we're in our 40s, or you're in your 50s.
Yeah, I'm an old dude, man. I'm an old guy.
Yeah. But I think it's a good way for an 18-year-old kid to kind of have that initial exposure. Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of funny. You mentioned what made you to go into the Army. I went in the Air Force, and the reason I made that decision is kind of funny. I was playing rugby, and I was sitting around. I'm going to the military, and literally there was a Coast Guard guy there, an Army guy, an Air Force guy, an Army guy, a Marine guy, and a Navy guy. Every one of them said go in the Air Force. Yeah. It's just like, all right, I'll go in the Air Force. So that was my time. And so I did 2 tours. I came in first as a nuclear weapons guy. So I used to launch nuclear bombs. I was stuck up in Wyoming under friggin' underground launching nuclear bombs, and then I went back in as a doc, and so I did trauma surgery. So you did. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said you did 14 tours overseas. Yes. Is that right? Yep. So where did you go?
So before we continue, I just want to double check since I have the same recording equipment. When I'm recording on my Roadcaster, it's red. So we're all set.
Yeah, no, it's recording. It's recording
okay,
through this app here,
so
we're good.
Just looking out.
I think we should be good. Yeah. Otherwise, we'll do it again. No,
yeah, of course. No. So, like I said, I went in 99, and then 2001. We all know what happened, and I was actually in Ranger School on 9/11, and so it was our last day of Ranger School. And the last day of Ranger School is you're down in Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, for your final phase. everybody got their goes. Everybody was ready. We were like turning in gear. And then the last thing you do in Ranger School is you gear up, put your parachute on. They drop you back into Fort Benning, and then you graduate the next day. And cadre came out and they said, hey, jump's been canceled. The president has grounded all aircraft. So come in the auditorium. We have something to talk to you about. We had no idea what was happening. And we walk in, and they on the big screen there, they showed us the planes hitting the towers, and we're just like, oh, all right, it's going down. And I was deployed, October 19th, which is, a month and a half later for the invasion. And I was supposed to invade Afghanistan. It was 3rd Ranger Battalion with one attachment from 2nd Battalion, which was us. And right before the invasion, they cut the attachment. So we just got to sit there and watch 375 invade Afghanistan. And the Delta guys did the Mullah Omar raid. And it was like, that was the beginning of the War on Terror. Back when it was awesome, before they drug it on for 20 years and then squandered everything we did. But no, I did several tours with the Ranger Regiment. And then, like a lot of people in that era, I left active duty in 2004 in the contracting world. I was an E5 at the time, making, I don't even remember, but $2,500 a month or something. And a company called Triple Canopy. I don't know if you're familiar with them. So it was started by a bunch of former Delta guys. And they're like, we could do the same job that we're doing right now and make 10 times as much money. And so they bid a bunch of State Department contracts and then hired a bunch of special operations guys to do security over there. And in 2004, they're paying $30,000 a month. So yeah, when you're a 23-year-old E5 and you hear something like that, it's like, all right, I'm in. And so I ended up doing that for another 5 years. But one thing I always tell people when the number comes up 14 deployments, our deployments were 90 days. So we were in and out. And then we'd redeploy home for, a month or 2 or 3. And what that does, when you have a high op tempo, it actually just gives you time to come home, decompress, kind of refit, re-kit, and then you're back at it again. But, some of those guys, fuck, dude, 18-month rotations and stuff. And so, I always say that as a caveat because it's like I did a lot of deployments, but time on the ground, there's a lot of guys that did a lot more than us.
Yeah, so. I remember when I landed in Afghanistan, and I was I was there as a physician, so I wasn't on the front line shooting at people or having people shooting. We had some rockets land by us and stuff, and we had suicide bombings go off. So there was some of that. Not I'm sure what you were experiencing, but I remember there was a group of Army guys. And I can't remember they're out of New York, and they literally flew back home and they landed. And they got to New York and they said, no, you're going to have to go back. And they turned them back around. And they were so bummed. They'd already been there a year and they extended by another, I think it was 3 months or something like that. So that's a long time. I did 6 months and I was like counting the days, man. Because once you have that number in mind, you're like, okay, all I got to do is make it one more day. And then it's like, and then they extend you and it's like your morale just goes to hell.
The same thing happened to us in, it was March of 2003. And my company was deployed to Afghanistan. And like I said, our rotations were supposed to be 90 days. And the PL's like, hey, get the platoon together. We have something to talk about. And we all meet up in his hooch. And he goes, hey, the rest of the regiment is invading Iraq. And that's going to be happening. It was March 19th, 2003. And they said, so all of our relief is no longer coming to relieve us. So we're in Afghanistan until further notice. And, fighting 2 wars in two different theaters started stretching a lot of the units pretty thin. And so we ended up not getting relieved for over 6 months. And I remember at the time for Rangers, we're just like, oh my God, this is insane. But even the normal units are doing more than 6 months. So, I guess a good experience to kind of put things into perspective,
How much time did you spend I'm in the shit, like I'm actually shooting guns at people and they're shooting at me? Was that something you did the whole time there, or was that which percentage of your deployment is that stuff?
So I always tell people this because when they think Army Ranger in Afghanistan, that we were just running and gunning and slaughtering dudes. I didn't fire my weapon one time with hostile intent inside of Afghanistan. And I spent over a year there, and we did hundreds of patrols, hundreds of patrol-based operations. We did raids, recons, ambushes, like all of this stuff, but it would always be a dry hole. We'd hit a house and it was a dry hole, dry hole, dry hole. We'd get intel that Chechnyan rebels were coming around this village at this time, and we'd set in an ambush. No one would show up. This happened over and over and over, and we were getting mortared and IED'd and rocketed like everybody does, but we weren't having anybody confront us face to face on the battlefield. And I started to get to the point in my mind where I'm like, war is easy. I just come over here. I work out all the time. We do long patrols through the mountains, and it's fun. Afghanistan is actually a very interesting culture. Like most of the places that we went to, the locals would be fighting with each other over who gets to present us with dinner that night. They were very grateful. And the village elders told us lots of stories about life under the Taliban regime, which they're back to now. I don't know if you saw their I just saw yesterday that face coverings are now required again per Sharia law, and it's like, man. But anyways, the whole point of even saying all this is Afghanistan for me was a very good cultural experience and just a good growing experience. But as far as war fighting, never even fired my rifle. And that's just, dude, war is right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, whatever you want to consider it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I saw the wrong time stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I was seeing. And there was a lot of it going on. I mean, honestly, there was not a single day where we did not have to operate on trauma patients. Granted, it was a mixture. It wasn't always U.S. guys. It was NATO guys. It was Afghan army. Even some Taliban. Operate on Taliban, and it was always pretty grisly stuff. And so it's clearly happening out there
for sure. And I can tell you that it was probably a bad thing that I went so long with just being in the right place in the right time, because it wasn't till 2004 and I deployed to Ramadi. And dude, we were going to Ramadi and all the leadership is like, listen, this isn't the same, okay? This isn't a matter of if, it's when. And we're all, you've been telling us that for years now. And that is where shit hit the fan. Like Ramadi, we were getting attacked on average of 40 times a month. And that's all encompassing. That's your base getting mortared, IEDs, ambushes, small arms fire. But more than once a day, you could count on some type of attack happening. And it was just night and day difference from Afghanistan. Those dudes were not afraid to confront us on the streets, and they'd be on rooftops and they would do all of these little intricate ways of funneling our traffic certain ways, roadblocks and setting up on bridges. Al-Qaeda, Iraq in 2004 and 2005, those dudes were there to throw down, and it happened all the time. And it was a very, very different experience from anything I saw in Afghanistan. But at the same time, I always tell people a lot of guys I don't like to talk about my combat experience. I think that's kind of bullshit, because you did what you did, you saw what you saw. And if people are interested in hearing about it, why would you be reluctant to share that? But it was also a good time. People have a hard time thinking that something like that would be fun. But at the time I was 24, I was fit as fuck. I was wild. We had a bunch of studs in our unit, and we wanted to go out there and mix it up. And, looking back on it now, I have to ask myself, man, what was that all about? All of the service that people gave to fight inside of Afghanistan and Iraq, all for naught, right? But at the foundational level of it, man, you got guys from Chechnya, Yemen, Syria. They were coming from all over the world to fight us, and we were coming from all over the world to fight them. And on a macro level, the politics and stuff behind it might not make sense, but on a micro level, it's just men wanting to compete against men.
Yeah,
at the highest level.
There is, and I can, I remember. When I was there, it was arguably some bad stuff going on. We're seeing all this Trump, but the people I was with, it was like you're on a team and you got a mission, and there's a lot of positive energy, and we laughed, and we're in there fucking cutting people's legs off, and we're laughing, we're having a good time. It sounds morbid, but that's what kept you through it.
Bro, you have to have that morbid humor.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you absolutely do.
And the thing is, and as the wars went on for 2 decades, we learned how to help troops decompress or how to transition into civilian life. But at the time when you're there, you're downrange, if something fucked up happens, you can be sad about it and you can let that affect you emotionally. But the fact is, come tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening when we have a raid planned or whatever it is, you're going back out on patrol. So what kind of headspace do you have to maintain knowing like, hey, I'm going back out on patrol tomorrow. I'm sure we're going to get ambushed or something. And in order to be able to operate in that environment, you have to, there's a couple things you have to do. You have to be able to make light of dangerous situations, just like you said. And we'd get attacked and, you know, we'd be laughing and joking about it and be like, oh, you see how close that one was? Look at this fucker shooting at me. Like actually having fun with it. But then the other side of it is you have to be able to compartmentalize it for the deployment. And then when you get home, I think that's when a lot of the wheels fall off for a lot of guys, because a lot of that stress and that trauma and those sad experiences of losing friends, it just compounds and compounds and compounds. And I mean, I don't know if there is a good way to deal with that, you know, but when you get home, you have to save that for when you get home for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and we know, I mean, everybody's acutely aware of the number of PTSD issues people have from deployments, and not every, you know, like I don't have anything. I mean, I saw some pretty grisly stuff, and I mean, some people would argue different, but I think mentally I'm still pretty normal. but I mean, you know, and this is an issue because I mean, obviously when you experience those things, that adversity, and you kind of just shrug it off, the rest of life can become relatively easy. Like I usually now, like, you know, you're our jiu-jitsu instructor, you're a black belt, you know, just Greg's out there choking me, you know, to death pretty routinely. But when I do that, I'm like, that's relatively stressful compared to the rest of my day. You know, I might be like, I lost that email or something. You know, some people get stressed out about that, but because I'm regularly exposed to life-threatening physiology, the rest of life is easy. So I imagine for you, I mean, even the jiu-jitsu stuff is like, you know, already people trying to shoot at me. And it's
I'll tell you, there's definitely there's an ebb and flow to that. And I don't care what kind of like trauma you're going through or what you're facing. The reality of it is you get callous to it and it becomes normal to you, right? But that has to be consistent to maintain that callousness. And I remember, I always tell the story when I'm talking about this with people, because in Ramadi 04, 05, an IED could go off right next to my truck and I wouldn't even jump. Like, all right, hey, push through. All right, contact right. You see those guys on it is like business as usual. Didn't even make my heart rate go up. And I'm not saying that to like boast or sound like a tough guy. That's just, you get conditioned to that environment. And then I did a deployment to Erbil. Are you familiar with Erbil?
No. Where's that?
It's up in Kurdistan.
Okay.
And when you're in Erbil, you can go to the mall. You can go to the restaurants. You can go race go-karts on the go-kart track outside of the mall. It's literally like a vacation.
It's kind of like guys going to Qatar.
Yeah, exactly.
Like right,
and so we were in Erbil for like 9 months over the course of, you know, we pushed in and out a couple times. But at the very end of that deployment, they said, hey, we need one squad to push down to Baghdad for a weekend for some special detail. I forgot what it was exactly. But the house we were in got mortared the first night we were there, and it blew all the windows out. And it was one of those mortars that rattles your bones. And me and one of my teammates were on the ground, and like we looked at each other and we're like, oh, we're behaving like the guys that we used to make fun of in Ramadi, because we hadn't been exposed to that in a year. And so that callousness wears off for sure. And, you know, I took an MMA fight in between deployments back in, I don't remember, 05 or something. And I remember walking into the cage, my coach is like, dude, you have no nerves right now. And I said, the worst thing that's about to happen to me is I could get knocked out. And it doesn't really scare me. And fast forward now, dude, if I do a jiu-jitsu tournament, I'm on the sideline warming up, my heart's beating 100 miles an hour. Like, I've lost that callousness. But, I mean, that's a young man's game too, you know?
Yeah, tell me about it. You know, I think I'm routinely one of the oldest guys at practice, but you know, anyways, good though. Hey, let me ask you. So you went from military to private contract. How was that different? Was there a big significant difference in how you approach things or how that ran?
You know, I think that contracting was probably the best experience of my life when it comes to learning about small unit tactics and leadership, because what you find in the military, even in the Ranger Regiment, there is a lot of leadership that kind of rules with an iron fist, right? They talk down to people. They treat you like shit. If you fuck up, it's a big problem. So you're just always, I mean, and that's just kind of the military 101. You're always on edge a little bit. You don't feel like you can relax. When I went into the contracting world, I mean, my project manager in Ramadi was a Delta Sergeant Major, right? And our vacations happened to line up when we were pushing home for 30 days. And he goes, hey, man, instead of going home, do you want to go to Prague with me and party in Prague? This is my boss,
Right,
who's a sergeant major. But once you're in the contracting world, it's so different because everything's based on merit. If you don't hold your weight, they send you home. And what you find is, man, you don't need all the military games to operate at the highest level. And these guys, man, they put together, they were 16-man teams, but we were self-sufficient. We were in charge of vehicle maintenance. We were in charge of procurement of equipment. And what you would find is, I forget exactly what the number is, but in the military, it's like 10 support unit personnel per one operator. And in the contracting world, it's 10 operators per one support person. So it's shifted the other direction, but what it makes people do is you're responsible for everything yourself. And what I found is that was actually a much better way to live. And the deployments just seemed to go smoother and make more sense because you were involved in things like, hey, if the vehicles need oil changes, you got to change the oil, you know? And what we found is the guys that were running those teams were so good at their job because they hand selected. They were all unit sergeant majors, E8s. And, man, I learned more leadership lessons during those 5 years because they showed you, man, if you lead a team with the correct, like, I don't know if kindness is the right word, but you treat your people, you respect your people, they will give their blood for you. And I mean, even when I was in the military, I remember there was certain people in my battalion that's like, man, if I see this guy on the objective, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, I mean,
right?
and not everybody, but there's some guys going to the military just because they don't have another option, and they're just kind of biding their time. And some of those guys get weeded out, some of them don't, or they get those jobs where they're support, and not taking away from there's some wonderful support people out there, but you've got complete skin in the game. I mean, you're the guy that's on the front line, you're the tip of the spear. And if your truck runs out of gas or needs an oil change and some guy back at the shop didn't do the job, you pay with the big price. And so it's like so how did the contractors figure out get their missions? I mean, did they work side by side with the military, or how did that typically go?
So I mean, each different AO, area of operation, kind of had different SOPs. But in Anbar province, basically State Department sent out a handful of diplomats. Their job, and looking back on this seems so silly because we were trying to push a Western ideology of democracy into the Middle East, and they have been at war since the beginning of mankind. And what they had is they had these different levels of diplomats shadowing, like our diplomat was attached to shadow the governor of Anbar province. And so he would basically, because Saddam ruled with an iron fist from top to bottom. So they didn't understand kind of like decentralized command and how, okay, if I'm the governor, what exactly does this entail? What are my duties? What are my responsibilities? Then what's the mayor's responsibilities? What's he in charge of? And we tried to emplace this Western ideology of government. And that's exactly what Al-Qaeda in Iraq stood against. So all these diplomats that were trying to teach a Western style of government, they had there was a price for their head. And that's why they had to have such robust, capable security. Because every time these guys went out of the wire, and dude, these people are not dumb. Like, people will make fun of them and call them all of these derogatory terms. And it's like, I assure you, these people, I mean, what is dumb, right? Like, sure, they might not have an SAT score that impresses you, but they adapt to the battlefield. They fight hard. Their ideology is everything to them, and they're willing to put it all on the line to confront you. And their TTPs are always changing in response to ours. And I mean, that's how it goes, right? And what we found is, man, these people were actually a very formidable enemy. And because of that, they needed to keep increasing the capability of the teams. And you saw it in a lot of the contracts because what inevitably happens in the contracting world is they'll start to give contracts to the lowest bidder, right? So Blackwater came in, I think it was '06, and took a bunch of the triple canopy contracts, and then a lot of dudes started getting killed because they started cutting corners and they weren't dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's. And I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the game, you know?
Yeah, that's, and I think, you know, fighting someone on their own home turf, you know, you can imagine somebody try to invade the U.S. Not only would you have the military, but you'd have all of us, you know, cooperating, doing everything we can to prevent that. So it's a very challenging
and
situation.
to answer the question about the military, yes, we worked hand in hand with the military because everybody on the team was former special operations. There was a lot of, I mean, the military's big, but it's also small, right? And so no matter where we went, there would be a first sergeant or a sergeant major that was like, oh man, remember we went through airborne school back in 1984, whatever it was. And because there was always some type of connection, they would let us use our chow halls. They would outfit us with equipment. And they even started giving us ComSec and radios and allowing us to utilize their QRF. And then additionally, we would help QRF for them sometimes since we were all up on the same network. And we had a really good relationship with the military. You know, like right in the beginning when the contractors first came on scene, we'd roll up and everybody would be like, are you guys Delta Force? You know what I mean? Because you see guys with baseball caps and beards. Yeah. Like, who are these guys? Yeah. You know? And there was a couple run-ins. I remember one incident where me and my teammate identified these guys loading RPGs into the trunk of a car. And there were several Marine outposts in the area too. And so I said, hey, when these guys come back in sight, we're fucking lighting them up. And we shot this car up and killed a couple dudes. And this Marine first sergeant came up to the rooftop and like came unglued on us. He's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And I said, hey, listen, first sergeant, we are a fresh set of eyes. We've only been here an hour. I know you. He's like, I have Marines on this roof. They didn't call anything in. I said, yeah, and these kids have been up here. You know, they're a Lance Corporal that's been on this same rooftop for 3 days. I said that we had a fresh set of eyes. We identified something and we engaged it. Send a squad out and do a BDA. That's a battle damage assessment, and let us know what you find. And they sent a squad out, and the car was loaded with RPGs, which we knew. We identified that before we engaged them. And that was kind of like the moment when the Marine Corps and our team was like, okay, we're in this together. Yeah. You know, you guys are cool. We're taking care of each other, you know?
So you did, you know, obviously time in active duty, and then you're in the contract, and then you transition to law enforcement, which is very common. You see a lot of ex-military guys go into law enforcement. Was that an easy decision for you to make? What made you promptly decide I'm done with the military?
Well, I was deployed. It was 2009, and this ended up being my last deployment. And Jenny just sent me a picture over Yahoo Messenger. Remember when Yahoo Messenger was the way to go? And it was a positive pregnancy test. And that was Siler, our daughter. She's 13 now. And she wrote me and she goes, hey, if we're going to do the family thing, I think it's time to put the deployment lifestyle behind you. And I couldn't argue with that. You know, a lot of my teammates when I was deployed had children back home. And I didn't understand necessarily what that meant because I wasn't a father yet. But after having kids and thinking about being gone 9 months out of the year, it just didn't make sense. And so I was like, you know what? I agree with her. I agree with you, Jenny. I think it's time for us to shift my profession and try and find something back home that still fills that void of like camaraderie and hanging out with the guys. And I mean, to circle back about the PTSD thing, I think a lot of soldiers, this is just my opinion, I don't think the emotional problems that they have are necessarily rooted in, oh, I saw a guy get blown up and it's just hard for me to deal with. I think they're rooted in, I had purpose, my job gave me meaning, I hung around good people, and I felt like I was part of a valuable team. And now all of a sudden, I'm back in some bumfuck town in Missouri stocking shelves at Home Depot, and they just can't come to peace with who they are now in you know, comparison to who they were. And so I thought that law enforcement would fill that void and give me that sense of like camaraderie and accomplishment. And the truth is, man, And this is just my experience, but I tried 2 different agencies. One was with the feds and one was with a local law enforcement agency in Los Angeles and in Seattle. And both agencies, I just saw terrible leadership. I saw terrible culture. People would bitch and complain about all the little stuff, but no one would ever perform well because nothing is based in merit. And it was like, man, it just felt toxic. And so, I mean, almost immediately, I knew that this wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. But what happens to everybody? You know, you have 3 kids and now I have a mortgage and you know how the story goes. And I just felt like, okay, well, this is something I do now for money, but I'm not that passionate about it. And I don't enjoy waking up and doing the job. And I never really did. And most cops, if they're being honest, will tell you the same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when you come out of the military, like, you know, I came out of the military initially. I was a nuclear weapons launch officer. How transferable is that into the private world? You know, yeah, you don't get jobs doing that, you know. And then, unfortunately, I transitioned and became a physician. But so, I mean, that's such a natural transition. You can't go from I'm a ranger to what does that translate to outside of the contract stuff? You know, you get in the civilian world, it's hard to do that. So you go into law enforcement, and it's kind of interesting, you know, because there's people that they back the blue, they hate the blue, defund the police, you know, all this stuff. We've got a lot of conflict, and, you know, there's good cops, there's bad cops, like anything else. When you have, you know, I suppose you've seen a ship, and when you went in, you know, however many years ago, it was 9 or 10 years ago, versus even in the last few years, was there a palpable change, or was it always just, it's bad from the beginning and it never got better?
So I should say this. The feds, for me, was a terrible experience from the beginning. They had terrible leaders, and they just, I mean, it's the federal government. It's like the blind leading the blind, and it was shocking to me. And I had a supervisor that would call me in her office every morning, just scatterbrained, and she's like, Anderson, what do I do with this, and what do I do with that? I'm like, I'm the newest deputy here. What are we talking about? You know, and I was with the U.S. Marshals, for anybody wondering. And another thing is, like, all these agencies like boast and beat their chest about all the cool stuff that they do, and it's not that cool. I would probably serve 1 high-risk warrant a month. That's the stuff you see on TV. And the rest of the time, I'm sitting in court producing prisoners for their hearings, driving prisoners to the hospital so they can get their shoulder MRI'd, and like just all this bullshit that was super low speed. But I didn't like that agency. I didn't like that agency in any capacity. So I left and I tried law enforcement again as a patrol police officer in Seattle. And I will say this, I started in 2017, and that was probably the very beginning of the downward spiral of Seattle. And I liked the job and I liked the people that I worked for a period of time. But as the city continued to spiral, you would see, like, you know, every single arrest you make, the prosecutor would write you an email. It's like, hey, I thank and appreciate you pressing charges on so-and-so for this arrest, and we don't want this to dissuade you from making future arrests, but unfortunately, we're deciding not to prosecute. Unfortunately, we're deciding not to prosecute. How many times can you get that message before you're like, what am I doing out here? Why am I out here trying to be a proactive police officer and clean my city up when the leadership in the city is actively against you? And they're pushing all the homeless stuff. They're legalizing heroin. And I don't know if you ever go downtown at all, but it's a shit show.
Yeah, I really haven't been.
Yeah, and you don't want. And dude, like 2015, Seattle was beautiful, and it's just gotten exponentially worse. So what you started to find in the law enforcement culture in Seattle is people were starting to get more and more disgruntled because they ask a lot of you, and then most of what you do just gets squandered. And you have to ask yourself, why am I putting myself at risk? You know, like, I'll show you pictures after the show. There was this 265-pound Samoan high on PCP, like running people over. And my partners tried to block him in, and he rammed her car out of the way. Like, complete psychopath, right? And bro, I pulled up and I kind of blocked him in again, and he was trying to get out by like going back and forth with the van he was in. And I yarded that dude out and just beat the shit out of him. And I broke my hand in the process. And so I broke his orbital, like, big scene. The fire department had to come, and He's now at the hospital being monitored. We charged him with like 7 felonies, right? They kicked him that night. Like, dude, I got a broken bone in my hand. This psychopath is terrorizing the community, and you let him go? Then come to find out, that same guy, and the prosecutor actually wrote me an email and apologized. She said, yeah, I forget his name, but we released him on his own recognizance, but what we failed to realize is we'd done the same thing the night before. And he had fought 7 police officers in the city of Redmond and was taken into custody. They kicked him, and now I broke a bone in my hand, and he terrorized another portion of the community just because we're not taking any actions against these psychopaths. And I mean, most people they're gonna behave in a manner that you tolerate, right? So if we let these criminals and these drug pushers and just go out there and have free reign, well, the proof's in the pudding. Seattle is now Seattle as a result of that. And so, yeah, I was getting disgruntled with the profession, but at the same time, I wasn't like, fuck police work, I want out. I gave myself a 5-year plan. I said, I don't love this, but I also don't hate it. But I know that I can't be one of those guys, because most cops in the lunchroom are talking about retirement. That's the common conversation that you hear every day. Dude, 12 more years, I got this much in my TSP, and if the calculations go right, I'll retire at 53 and I'll have $1.7 million in the bank. And everybody's fixated on what they're going to do when they're 60 years old. And it just never made sense to me, because I might fucking die tomorrow.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so me and Jenny were like, let's do a 5-year plan and see if we can get some other things going. And I didn't need to be rich, but I needed to have enough money just to sustain life. And then once the coronavirus shit happened, the profession of law enforcement was starting to be utilized in a way that just ethically didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, you sign up to, I mean, assume you go into police thinking I'm going to take bad guys off the street.
Of course.
I mean,
yeah.
That's what I want the police to do. I mean, I don't care, if you're citing people for speeding and whatever, but
I never wrote a speeding
ticket. Right. But
I'm proud of that.
Right. But I mean, when you start saying, well, now we're going to enforce someone for wearing a mask or something like that, or I don't know what the stuff is. I know that it led to you leaving the police department.
Yeah.
And without getting me kicked off YouTube, but I'm just it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't make sense to use that resource in that way. I mean, as a policeman, I can't imagine you get up in the day thinking, oh, I'm still excited to do this meaningless stuff.
No,
I mean,
and here's the thing, like, regardless of where you stand on the mask mandates or the vaccine, like you can be on either side of the fence on that, and that's fine. And we should be able to have civil discourse and people can have disagreements. I understand that. That's life. But as a law enforcement officer, if I'm going to go up to someone and make some type of enforcement action, i.e. make an arrest or cite you or even give you a verbal command, right? I can't give you a command unless I have legal authority to do so. And the only way that a Washington state police officer holds legal authority to do so is there has to be a law that's been legislated, that's in existence, that's on the books. So if I see someone criminally trespassing and a business owner calls me and is like, hey, this guy won't leave my store. I've asked him to leave. He's not buying anything. Now I'll walk up to the guy and I'll be like, hey, because criminal trespass is on the books and it's a law, I can say, hey, sir, the business owner has asked you to leave, so now I am giving you a lawful order to leave. And if you refuse to, I can cite you or arrest you based on RCW, blah, 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 blah. If I make that cite or I make that arrest, there's literal blocks on the paperwork that I have to pull from Washington state law and show which law was being violated and why I was able to make that citation or that arrest. Police work is very meticulous to the point that it's like mind-numbing. And for us to just arbitrarily say, oh, well, the Mayor Jenny Durkin said to do this, so now I'm going to go do this. That's not how it works. That'd be like a police officer coming up to you and being like, hey, I don't like the color green. I want you to change your shirt to red. Fuck you. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have that authority to do that. And so I talked to my police chief. I said, a lot of the stuff we're seeing right now seems outside of our legal authority. And I'm not comfortable doing that because if something ever comes back on us, that's going to be on me. The department will hang you out to dry. Everybody knows that. These mega agencies, if it ever behooves them to just throw you out, you get thrown out. And my chief was like, no, I agree with you. We're seeing this is a weird time in law enforcement, and I'm not going to ask you guys to do anything like that. And if that's pushed down the pipe, I'm going to stand behind you guys. And it was actually a good meeting. It gave me comfort. And then just, every time you turned on the news, surfers were getting arrested.
Yeah.
Mothers at the park were getting arrested. And the one that kind of pushed me over the edge was, 2 young Hispanic ladies were doing nails out of their own basement. Dude, they're in their house. Somebody came there voluntarily to have their nails done, and they sent in undercover agents and arrested them. And it's like, okay, that's it. We are out of touch with what law enforcement is supposed to be doing, protecting our communities. And so that's what motivated me to make that video. And I was speaking to other cops, and I'm like, guys, we can't do this. This is not what we do. Our oath is we are sworn to uphold and defend our citizens' liberties and the Constitution. And we're doing the opposite of that right now. And so my department's like, you can't say that publicly. And here's the bizarre thing. My commander's like, I agree with your message, Greg. Everything you said is correct, but we can't say that publicly. And that's a bigger issue to me. That's a cultural issue. How can you feel a certain way as a man, but I can't say it publicly? That doesn't sit well with me.
Well, even what your job is. I mean, this is, our job is to uphold the law, and this isn't a law, and we're being asked to do that. And again, it's a waste of resources. You got better things to do. I mean, I get that, like in medicine, there's so much, again, and there's reasons for that, but there's so much paperwork and all this stuff. And then when I go down to Peru to do, missionary work, there's none of that. It's just like, my kid's messed up. Can you fix him? Yeah, here we can do that.
Yeah.
It's so much more pleasant. And so when you're inundated with that stuff, it's very frustrating. So in the video, I think it was on Instagram, you put a video and it went relatively viral, got like a gazillion views or something like that.
I don't even know what it's up to, but one share alone got 15 million.
Wow.
And so I don't even, and it's funny because like my bosses were like, Greg, we've been directed to tell you to pull the video down. Well, you're the chief of police. Who's directing you?
Right.
And he wouldn't say, so I have my theory on that. But, if you're directing someone to take a video down that you agree with, what does that say about you? And I told the chief, I said, Chief, imagine if you would have put this message out there, how powerful it would have been, But, they said, if you don't take it down, we're going to have to terminate you for insubordination. And then this is what they said to me that even made it grosser. And they're like, but Greg, listen, it's already all over YouTube. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. You didn't post it to any of those platforms. So people have ripped it and reposted it. So your video will still be out there. You just have to pull it down from your personal page to show compliance. And I was like, that's where we have a problem.
Yeah, that's you're the dog, I'm the master, and you better sit when I tell you.
I told Jenny, I was like, because she knows how I'm wired, and she was sitting, because they didn't tell me this face to face. It was at the end of my shift. They called me, so I was in my Forerunner with Jenny, and the phone was on speaker, and I said, hey. She looked at me and she goes, I know what your answer is going to be, and I said, I don't have a choice, because if I take that video down, I literally said verbatim in the video that your paycheck as a law enforcement officer does not supersede your citizens' constitutional liberties, period. So don't tell me this is because I have mouths to feed or I have a mortgage to pay, because guess what? Everybody does. And the SS guards in Nazi Germany probably did too, right? Like, you don't get to use that as an argument to why you get to bend the rules and how we police our communities. And so I said, I'll starve to death out in the woods. Eating bugs.
Maybe not bugs. We'll get some beer or something
I'll starve to death out in the woods before I will acknowledge that or accept my chain of command's terms. And I also think that comes back to, like, when we were young men and being deployed and going through a lot of dangerous stuff, like, I didn't ever think that I'd see 30. After a year and a half in Ramadi, I was like, this is just a numbers game, and there's no way that I make it out of this on the other side. And I think coming to terms with your own mortality is actually something that's freeing, you know, because it's like these people, there's nothing that they can do that's going to intimidate me up into taking my life. And I mean, that's also what keeps me free today and thinking about all the shit that the government's doing. If the only thing that you can do is kick my door down and come for me, okay, then maybe that's where we go, you know?
Yeah.
But I won't go too crazy because I don't want to get you kicked off of YouTube. If you want to listen to my podcast, I pull no punches.
Got it. No, but I mean, I think it's, you know, it is. I mean, you think about it, most people, I mean, you know, they're so concerned about loss of comfort. I mean, it's not even life, it's comfort.
Yes.
And we've become so comfortable as a society. You know, here we are sitting in an air-conditioned room, when, you know, whatever. But
but you were also doing deadlifts and sprints when I drove up the driveway.
Right, yeah.
And we're going to be doing jiu-jitsu in a couple hours.
Well, we're going to be eating steak before that too. Right. But I mean, I think it's something where, you know, it's freeing that you think about it. I mean, the whole point of life is living life, and if you're living in fear or worrying about whatever is preventing you from doing things that are right, that you feel passionately about, then that's a big problem. It really is. I mean, because you get all these passive, submissive people that their quality of life, I just wouldn't want to be there. I mean, you can't handle that.
Here's the ironic thing about life, and the older I get, the more that I realize this, and I push this message a ton on my podcast, is that microdose adversity. Put yourself through stuff that sucks. Like, I sit in my sauna at 215 degrees all the time, and then I have people write me on Instagram and be like, that's more than you boil water at. You're an idiot. And it's like, but when people see you doing hard shit, it either motivates them or they want to hate on you. And if they want to hate on you, go ahead. Because the path to becoming the best version of yourself is constantly going through some type of adversity. And that can be on the mats. That can be through fasting. Like, I hate fasting, so I do it sometimes. That can be through cold water exposure. And the list goes on and on and on of stuff that you can do that makes your body hurt and is difficult. But what we found in our American culture now is you wake up in your room that's 73 degrees on your Tempur-Pedic bed. You walk downstairs, you make your coffee, you get in your car that's also 73 degrees. You drive to your office. Everything's climate controlled. You're always fed. You're always warm. You're always, you know, you're not dying of thirst. You're not worried about the rival horde that lives on the other side of the valley, raping and pillaging this weekend. All the shit that human beings had to face from the beginning of time, we've lost in the last 100 years. And that is why everybody's morbidly obese, everybody's depressed and on medication. And like, this generation of youth, they don't even know who they are.
Yeah, and some people would say, well, maybe it's a good thing that I don't have a rival horde that I'm worried about. And there's some positive that, yeah, I mean, all things being considered, I'd rather not be shot at every day. But at the same time, there's some physiologic implications of always being comfortable. And I think that's important. I like that concept of microdosing. Let me ask you, I mean, you're wearing a shirt that says Free Cain. That's for Cain Velasquez. And so as a law enforcement person, you know, we don't want vigilante justice necessarily. I mean, you can see the potential problem of that. But I mean, this guy whose young boy, is sexually molested over and over and over again, hundreds of times, and he's confronted with the guy, and he basically does what probably both of us would do.
He tried to kill him.
Right.
And the only problem with what Cain did is he planned it and he executed it poorly. But as far as, I mean, this is where I'm at with the government. And I'm very outspoken about this because the government is failing its people. They're taking all of our money. You know, I just listened to Eric Greitens talk. Do you know who he was? The former governor of Missouri. Okay. And he did a big audit of all the tax dollars that were collected for this massive statewide infrastructure bill. And after the audit, what they found was 42 cents on the dollar went to actually building roads and bridges. The rest got laundered through a bunch of different methods to go into lobbyists and re-election campaigns. And so these people are criminals. They're stealing from us. They're not holding up their end of the bargain. And now, and I don't know how far down the conspiratorial rabbit hole you want to go, but with all of these George Soros appointed prosecutors, they are not keeping our cities safe anymore. And you can say that vigilante justice is something that maybe we shouldn't be considering, But if the government is failing to do their job to protect their communities, guess who's going to do it? Dads and fathers and husbands and brothers. And that's the point that we're at. And I promise you, like, if you were a judge that I provided enough evidence, and here's how law enforcement works. If this dude was arrested and arraigned and the prosecutor said, we're taking up charges against this guy, it's way beyond probable cause. It's not proven beyond a reasonable doubt yet, because that's when a guilty verdict comes through, right? But clearly, this guy is your guy. And for the judge to just say, you know what, it's cool, we're gonna let this guy back out into the community. You're telling us a message that you are no longer capable of defending our community, so we're going to do things our way.
So Cain Velasquez is the guy that molested his kids, was let free on his own recognizance?
They said they released him to a halfway house.
Wow.
And if anybody has ever been in law enforcement, you know exactly what a halfway house is. It's nothing. There's no security. There's no procedures to come and go. Like, when I first started working as a deputy, I would get these escape warrants. And it's like, this guy escaped custody, and now there's a warrant for his arrest. And I'm thinking like Shawshank Redemption shit, you know? Dude, he escaped federal custody? No. He was in a halfway house, and one day he just decided he didn't want to be there anymore. And it happens every single day. And so I think a halfway house, sure, I do think that there's a big part of the judicial system that's broken that should be looking towards rehabilitation. And when I was in Los Angeles, 90% of the kids that we arrested were caught up in gang violence, drugs, slinging dope, pimping hoes. I think that there is a path for those kids because there's a lot of good people. I've had great conversations with guys in the back of my car on the way to jail, and they're growing up in these projects, and they're fourth generation of gangbanging, pimping hoes, and slinging dope. And think, if you saw your great grandpa doing that since the time you were 2, try breaking that cycle. That's going to be tough, right? And so I think that there is a big emphasis that needs to be put on helping people and rehabilitating people. Sex offenders aren't one of them. Those people, in my opinion, are wired backwards.
So you mentioned you did mixed martial arts, and you obviously do jiu-jitsu. When did you get into that game, and what, I mean, is it a natural progression from just being special operator, or how did you do that?
It was, you know, you always hear people say in jiu-jitsu, leave your ego at the door, right? And I kind of hate that saying, because training to be a fighter is ego-driven. I want to be able to beat other men, right? And so I was actually on deployment. This was 2004. And a Navy SEAL that was on the base with me in Ramadi, he said, hey, and we were working together, and I'd become friends with him. He goes, hey, do you want to train tonight? I said, yeah, I'll train with you. What do you do? And he said, I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and a Muay Thai kickboxer. And to me, that meant like karate.
Yeah,
you know, I
don't know what the hell that means.
Yeah, I didn't respect it at all. I was like, okay, you know, I was 220 pounds at the time, super fit. I don't lose fights. You know what I mean? Like, I'll go, oh, he wants to train fighting? Okay, I'll go fight this guy. And now that you're training, you know exactly what a purple belt kickboxer does to someone that doesn't train. And he absolutely made me feel like a child. And I didn't know until that moment that other men on planet Earth could do that to me. And he was like 175 pounds, but he was also built like George St. Pierre. Like, he was a super athlete. But I still had, 40, 50 pounds on this guy. And he could throw me around. He'd kick me in the leg and then shoot in and dump me on my head, and just over and over and over and over getting submitted. And that was that moment where I was like, everything that I've ever thought about who I was a lie. And I tell people all the time, I said, jiu-jitsu doesn't show you who you are. Jiu-jitsu shows you who you aren't. Because I thought I was one of those guys, and I'm not. And so as soon as I got home from that deployment, I found a MMA school and a jiu-jitsu academy and started training 6 days a week. And I said, I have to get good at this stuff. And I did MMA. I only took 2 cage fights, and I just wanted the experience of it. I never wanted to pursue like that as a career. And the reality of it is I wasn't good enough either. I mean, that's just what it is. And but I enjoyed the process of learning how to fight and the confidence that comes with that, and just the belief that gives you in who you are as a man. But after, 5 years of MMA, I was like, man, I'm going home with headaches all the time. And I'm getting kicked and punched in the face all the time. I'm no longer enjoying the process, but I still love grappling. And that's when I said to Jenny, I said, I'm quitting all the stand-up stuff, and I'm just putting all of my eggs in the grappling basket because it's something I can pursue for the rest of my life. And, dude, I'm glad I did, because jiu-jitsu has given me more than I could have imagined. And, I got my black belt in the very end of 2014, opened up electric jiu-jitsu in 2015. And for the first 5 years, it was more of like just a little club with me and Daniel and Mike Kozak and a couple guys. And then after coronavirus hit, we grew by 600%. And so I think we have 185 members now.
Yeah.
And it's outrageous. I mean, the mats are packed. We got a bunch of cool people up there. And I always say this when I'm talking about this, because it's important for police officers to know, like, if you're passionate about something else or you have another skill set, dude, take that leap of faith and try and build something, because I'm making more money now teaching jiu-jitsu than I ever made as a police officer. And I think people tell themselves a lie that they're stuck in their current place and like this is just, and I was there too. And so, man, jiu-jitsu's been one of the most rewarding journeys of my entire life. And now, like, I mean, you're doing it with Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing it with my daughters. It's becoming a family thing. And I tell people all the time, man, I wouldn't sell my jiu-jitsu for $5 million. Like, if I had to wake up tomorrow is day one white belt, it's not for sale, because it's given me my identity and it's given me everything that I have. So
Yeah, and I think that, particularly, and I love that because, Greg teaches a kids class too, and I come in there and you don't let those kids slack. I mean, it's all business,
Yeah.
man. No crying on the mats. And I think that's a good lesson to learn for both boys and girls. I mean, I think it's, it's not just a boy thing, but what do you feel? I mean, if we could mandate some sort of martial arts training for our children, would that change where we are as a society?
I think so.
Yeah.
The UAE has jiu-jitsu as part of their school curriculum. And I mean, and I'm biased because I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, but I didn't become a jiu-jitsu guy by accident. I did it all. I boxed, I did kickboxing, I wrestled. I have a good understanding of a lot of different aspects of martial arts, and I think jiu-jitsu is the best tool to teach people about themselves. And for several different reasons. For the main reason is that it's fairly safe and it's pretty sustainable. And so, like, yeah, you'll bonk head sometimes or twist your knee. That's just life, though. That can happen anywhere, right? But we're not going to have our kids boxing and kickboxing and kicking each other in the face when they're 10 years old. But you can have them training jiu-jitsu as hard as they can. Like, how many times have you seen Lucas, like, fighting for his life?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so stubborn too, just unwilling to give up. And think about those moments, because we've both been there. We're both there regularly. Like, Daniel caught me the other day and he was twisting my arm and I was like, no, I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to get out of this. And I was trying to figure out how, and I couldn't, and I had to accept defeat. And it's like, to people that don't train, that might sound kind of silly, but there's a lot of emotional growth that goes on during that process. And I've been doing this for, 18 and a half years now, and I still go through that. And so I think if we could get our kids to start to learn, like, man, what does adversity really feel like? How do I face it? How do I overcome it? And that's why, like, I usually talk to the kids at lineup and I'll tell them, like, guys, not crying on the mats. This isn't just because I'm trying to be hard or I'm trying to be mean to you. Crying about something because it made you feel uncomfortable doesn't serve you at all. It's not going to help you solve the problem. Like, I tell my kids all the time, if something sad happens, if your pet dies, you can cry and I'll support you and I'll hug you. But if you fall down and skin your knee in the driveway and start crying, I won't tolerate that, because what you're doing is you're allowing the emotion of panic to dictate your actions. And that's why I try and, like, get that out of their heads. And man, you see a lot of those kids are little savages now.
Yeah, I mean, you just ignore it. I mean, it's like, okay, it's fine. I mean, I know as a physician, I've seen so many bad, horrible traumas, and then when your kid goes in and they got a little blood, it's like,
Yeah.
Just don't bleed on the carpet, dude. It's kind of like, it's kind of that mentality, and a lot of people push back against that. there is a sort of belief, the toxic masculinity, that men should not be that way. We should not be tough. We should not be callous. But I mean, I think that's somewhat about being a man to some degree.
Bro, I think it's a dichotomy like everything else in life. Like as a man, we should know how to love and be kind to people,
sure, of course,
and be compassionate, and all of the things that kind of balance you out. But the other side of it is you do need to be able to be hard. You do need to be able to be a warrior. You do need to be able to confront violence and not live in this fearful state. And jiu-jitsu starts to hone that in people from the very beginning. If you ever, who'd be a very good guest at some point is Christy Campbell. Because blue belt Christy Campbell at the gym, her journey is fascinating. And hearing it from a woman's perspective, she's like, when I walk out to my car in, the Fred Meyer's parking lot, I don't have a sense of fear in me anymore. And she goes, as a woman, I used to that's always in the back of my mind. Who's watching me? What might this person do to me? And it's like, okay, are you creating that in your head? Maybe to a certain extent, but perception is reality, right? And she said by becoming a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, it has completely eliminated fear from her life. That's powerful, man. That's what it's all about, Yeah,
I don't, because most of my life I've been a big, strong guy. I'm not really walking around terrified of people. But learning jiu-jitsu has probably made me, I should be more terrified because, you don't know what people know.
You never know who knows what.
Right. But I mean, at the same time, you realize you're not going to indiscriminately use that. You're not out there to go beat people up on the street randomly because you know jiu-jitsu. I mean, there's probably a few knucklehead guys that do that, but for the most part, I mean, you're pretty disciplined.
I think, and man, I've heard a million stories over the last 24 months of like people getting confronted in grocery stores for not having their mask on, or people getting yelled at the airport, and like all of these. And Tyler got hit up everywhere Tyler goes. Someone's like getting on his case about this.
Man, like his beard, his former beard. Yeah.
And I've been waiting. You know what I mean? I was like, confront me in the soup aisle, please. Like I'm begging for somebody to do that. But my theory on jiu-jitsu is, where jiu-jitsu probably protects you the most is not your ability to fend off an attacker, but rather the fact that attackers see confidence in your posture, they see confidence in your eyes, and what are they looking for? They're looking for the weakest link.
Right, sure.
And so they're going to go right past you and try and victimize the next person. Yeah. And I tell my students all the time, I say, your jiu-jitsu is probably prevented more encounters than you're ever going to know, because those people see that shit,
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, it's kind of funny. You go through life and with a different perspective now. And so like it used to be I'd look at people and I'd like, well, what kind of surgery they need, or what did they have, or why are they wearing that brace? And I was like, this is what's happening now. And you're like, okay, if this guy came after me, I mean, do you ever do that? Like
100, bro.
That guy, what would I do? How would I take this guy down? How would I neutralize the threat?
Dude, I went to, there's this jump park called the Flying Squirrel in Everett. And I was there last weekend for Logan's 7th birthday. And this big dude, probably 300 pounds, starts walking towards me. And I look at him, and he was looking at me in a way that was like, it wasn't just, hey, who's this random guy? He was kind of eyeing me. And so I was like, all right, if he gets this close, it's going to be double leg takedown, and I'm going to get on. And I started like building this scenario in my head of what was going to happen if this dude confronted me. And as soon as he got within like speaking distance, he goes, dude, Greg Anderson? And I was like, yeah, what's up, man? He goes, man, I'm Luis. I love your podcast. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to tone it down a little bit.
You got too many psychopaths listening to your podcast, perhaps. It's kind of funny because I get recognized every once in a while.
I bet you get recognized.
And it's always been really a nice experience. I remember one time I was walking in the beach in Dana Point, California, and this little car just starts driving and slowing down, and I could tell they recognized me. And it was this lady who just looked bizarre. And I didn't know if she was like a psychopath, like vegan.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Crazy. And I didn't know what she was going to do. And she rolled down the window and, hey, are you ShawnBaker? I said, yeah. But I just for a moment, I didn't know. I didn't know if she was going to pull out a gun and gun me down or some of the craziness stuff. But yeah, that is some interesting stuff. So what,
Well, on that note too, you got to tell the story of when you walked into my gym and someone says, shout out David Potts. He goes, man, you look just like ShawnBaker.
Yeah, that was funny. I'd never been asked that before. I said, hey, did anybody ever tell you look like ShawnBaker? I said, actually, no, because that's who I am. It was just kind of a funny thing, because he thought, I thought he lived in California or something. I used to. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy. So, anyway, well, hey, Greg, let's go eat some steaks, man.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Two big old tomahawks. We're going to crush these, medium rare, sous vide, seared at 1,500 degrees. Thank you for being my first guest, Greg.
I'm always down. I enjoy podcasting.
This was wonderful, man. Awesome, man. Thank you very much, man.